Snow clung to the chapel's window panes like forgotten lace, thick and stubborn. Inside, lanterns flickered against the cold, their flames struggling to stay lit. The preacher stood stiffly at the altar, hands clasped in front of him, eyes flicking between the door and the bride. Silence crept in like frost. Maybelle Carter sat motionless in her custom-carved walnut wheelchair, her wedding dress billowing out like a snowdrift around her. Her hands, hidden in delicate gloves, trembled in her lap. The ivory satin had been a luxury, saved up from years of stitching quilts and hemming pants for ranchers. Now it felt like a cruel costume. They whispered. She heard every word. Too big for the chair. Ain't she? Poor man didn't know what he was getting into. Should have picked a sturdier bride. Her cheeks burned hotter than the stove tucked in the back corner of the chapel. The guests, sparse as they were, didn't even try to hide their stares. A few of them had come out of boredom, others to see if the mail-order bride would really show up in her condition. She had. He hadn't. The groom's boots had hit the floorboards 20 minutes ago, fast and loud. She'd clutched the bouquet tighter, convinced he'd just gone to shake off nerves. But when the laughter came, sharp and cutting from outside the chapel, something in her chest caved in. "You boys were right," he'd hollered. "A fat cripple? I'd rather marry my horse." The chapel door had slammed shut behind him, a gust of wind snatching the veil off her head and sweeping it into the aisle. It lay there like a ghost no one wanted to bury. Maybelle blinked once. Slowly, the preacher's face turned pale. He reached for her, but she rolled backward, wooden wheels creaking like a coffin cart. Her fingers tightened on the armrests. No tears. Not here. Not in front of them. She wheeled herself down the aisle, as if it were a battlefield. The dress dragged through muddy snow, tracked in from boots. A child near the back pointed and laughed. Her stomach twisted. She kept moving. Outside, the sky was a dull steel gray, thick with the promise of more snow. Her breath came in short puffs, sharp with cold and humiliation. The church door groaned, closed behind her. She sat there on the chapel steps, lace-soaked, curls unraveling, skin raw. How stupid she'd been to believe in love letters. She'd thought him sincere. His letters were sweet, full of flattery and dreams of a warm home and gentle hands. He'd said he liked a woman with meat on her bones. Said he wanted a real wife, not a picture doll. He hadn't mentioned her legs, but she'd told him. She'd sent the truth in ink. He just hadn't cared. Not until he saw her in person. The wind picked up, biting through the fabric. She tried to lift her hands to fix the shawl slipping from her shoulders, but they wouldn't move right. Her arms ached. Her heart hurt worse. "I'd marry you," came a voice from behind. She turned, startled. A man stood just beneath the awning, half-shadowed, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn duster coat lined with fur. A revolver hung low on his hip, a hat pulled low enough to hide his eyes, but not the scar that cut through the corner of his jaw like a lightning strike. He didn't smile. She squinted at him. Didn't ask. "No, but you look like you needed to hear it." The corner of her mouth twitched, close to a smile, close to a sob. She didn't give him either. "Folks around here ain't got manners," he added. "But you already knew that." "I know more than they think," she said, voice hoarse. "Know what it's like to be looked at and dismissed in the same breath." He pulled a tin from his pocket, lit a match, and offered her a warmed biscuit. "You look like you could use something to chew on that ain't someone's cruelty." She stared at it, unsure, but hunger tugged at her pride. She took it. His fingers brushed hers, brief, steady, warm. He didn't speak again, just sat beside her, close enough to share his coat's heat, far enough to let her breathe. "I'm not weak," she muttered. "I get around fine. I work. I can shoot a rifle better than most men. I believe you." She glanced sideways. "Why?" "Because you showed up." Maybelle blinked hard. Snowflakes danced around them, like ash from some quiet fire. He didn't look away. He wasn't gawking at her chair, or her hips, or her flushed, blotchy face. He was looking at her, steady, measured, like she mattered. "What's your name?" she asked. "Silas Boone." "Sounds like a gunslinger." He gave a quiet chuckle. "I've been called worse." She tilted her head. "Why were you at the wedding?" "I knew the groom. Did some work with him once. Heard he was marrying a woman with real grit. Wanted to see if it was true." "And," she challenged, mouth tight. He looked at her, long and slow. Truth don't come dressed in lace. It comes in how you hold your head when they laugh at you. Her chest tightened. That familiar ache, the one that said maybe she wasn't entirely alone. Why didn't you stop him? Silas hesitated. Some men don't deserve interference. They deserve the weight of their own choices. He'll carry this one. She stared out into the falling snow. Her fingers found the edge of her dress, pulling the soaked satin away from the wheels. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. Same thing you were always going to do, he said. Survive. A long silence passed. Somewhere in town, a horse whinnied. A door slammed. A piano started playing in the saloon down the hill. She broke the quiet. My name's Maybelle Carter. I came here thinking I was going to be someone's wife. Silas turned toward her. You still can be. A bitter laugh slipped out before she could stop it. You offering? He met her eyes, and for a moment, she saw no pity there. Just something deeper, something unfinished. Not today, he said, but I ain't going far. He tipped his hat, stood, and walked off through the snow, his coat flaring behind him like the wings of some worn angel. She watched until he disappeared into the whiteness. Maybelle sat alone for a long time, biscuit crumbs in her lap, the wind easing off just enough to feel like mercy. The ache in her chest dulled. Not gone, but quieter. Inside the chapel, someone blew out the last candle. The wedding was over, but something else had just begun. The wind howled across the high plains like a wounded animal, dragging snow across the earth in furious spirals. Maybelle Carter leaned into it as best she could, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, eyes barely slitted against the blinding white. The storm had come faster than expected, and now the town was behind her, swallowed by snow and silence. Her dress was ruined, soaked through, and clinging to her like frostbitten regret. The wheels of her chair groaned, fighting the packed drifts. Her breath came in short, choppy bursts. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stay in that godforsaken town one more minute. Not after the chapel. Not after the laughter. Not after the look in those men's eyes. Each push forward sent a bolt of pain up her arms. Her gloves were soaked. Her fingers were starting to go numb. But she wouldn't stop. Couldn't. She'd survived worse. The wind knocked her sideways, nearly tipping the chair. She threw her weight to one side and cursed under her breath. Her hair was plastered to her face. Her lips had split from a cold. Still, she pressed on. She thought of home, if you could call it that. A tiny room above a butcher shop in Missouri, where she'd stitched shirts by candlelight and read every word he'd written her. Mr. Elias Granger, the man with the careful penmanship and sugar-coated lies. The man who'd promised her land, warmth, love. The man who'd called her a cripple to her face before walking out of the church in front of the whole town. A root snagged the wheel. She wrenched it free and kept going, though she could no longer feel her toes. The land stretched ahead in a featureless blur of white. Her breath came out in clouds, smaller and smaller. She whispered his name, not Elias's, but the other one, the stranger from the chapel. Silas Boone. He'd looked at her like she mattered. He hadn't flinched or pitted her. He'd offered a biscuit, warmth, words that stuck deeper than any insult ever had. But he'd left, walked off into the storm with a promise of not going far. She hadn't seen him since. Something cracked beneath her. Ice. Her wheels sank. She cursed and rocked back. The axle protested. Her breath caught. No, she muttered. No, you don't get to stop now. But her voice was swallowed by the wind. The chair wouldn't budge. She slid out of it, legs dragging uselessly behind her, and began to crawl. The snow bit into her palms. Her dress tore. The cold was inside her now, gnawing at her ribs. She reached a cluster of rocks and dragged herself behind them, curling tight. The world dimmed. Her eyelids grew heavy. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was how it ended. Not with a bullet or a blaze, but slow and freezing and quiet. She thought of her father's barn, the smell of hay, and the day the stallion bucked her straight into the side of the trough. She'd been 15. Her spine hadn't healed right. Her legs never worked the same again. Folks said it was a shame. Said she'd be a burden. Said no man would want her now. Maybe they were right. But just before the dark closed in, boots crunched nearby. A coat flapped. A voice cursed low and urgent. Maybelle. She forced her eyes open. Silas dropped beside her, snow in his beard, eyes burning through the storm. He scooped her up like she weighed nothing and wrapped her in the folds of his coat. She felt the heat of his body, the roughness of his hands, the panic beneath his calm. "I thought you weren't going far," she managed, teeth chattering. "You call this far?" He carried her through the storm, one step at a time. She clung to his chest, listening to the thud of his heart. It beat steady like hooves on packed dirt. He took her to a cabin, small, half buried in snow, with smoke barely curling from the chimney. Inside, it was dim and warmer than she expected. A fire sputtered in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. A cot sat against the far wall, rough wool blankets folded neatly. He set her down gently and began stripping off his coat, his gloves. She saw his arms were scarred, long, thin lashes of old battles. He moved with the careful grace of a man used to surviving. He handed her a cup. "Drink." It was broth, salty hot, healing. She drank greedily. "You followed me," she said after a moment. "Didn't have to. You left tracks a blind man could follow. I thought you didn't want to get involved." "I didn't." She raised an eyebrow. "Changed my mind." He began unrolling a bundle near the fire. Inside were clean bandages, a small bottle of whiskey, a tin of coffee beans. She watched him work, watched the way his hands moved with practiced ease. He didn't ask about the chair, didn't mention the dress. He just tended to her hands, rubbed warmth into her fingers, gave her space and silence. "I didn't expect to survive out there," she said quietly. "Wasn't about to let you freeze. You didn't owe me anything." "No," he said, "but I reckon the world already took too much from you." That stuck. She looked away. The fire popped. Her limbs burned as the feeling returned, painful, prickling needles under her skin. "Why help me?" she whispered. Silas sat across from her, resting his elbows on his knees. "Because I've seen what this land does to folks who don't fit into its mold. And because I've watched people turn away when they should have leaned in." He poured coffee into a tin cup. "My wife was the same. People called her odd, said she was too quiet, too clever. She saved my life more times than I can count." "She gone?" Maybelle asked softly. He nodded once. "Raiders hit our wagon 2 winters back. Took everything." She didn't scream, just loaded the rifle and told me to run. Maybelle swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I should have stayed and died beside her. But I ran, lived, been trying to figure out what for ever since." They sat in silence. "I'm not her," Maybelle said after a moment. "No," he agreed. "You're different. You got fire." She laughed bitterly. "Not much use in my legs. You think a bullet knows the shape of your spine? You think a prairie fire asks if you can walk before it burns everything down?" She stared into the flames. "I thought getting married would fix something," she admitted. "That it would make me enough." "Getting married don't fix a damn thing," Silas said. "But surviving? That makes you more than enough." The storm began to ease outside. She could hear the wind shifting, turning. "You have a plan?" she asked. "For what?" "Living." He considered it. "Not really. Was gonna drift through town, sell a few traps, maybe head east. You're not from around here?" "Born in a jail cell near Abilene. Raised by a blacksmith with a drinking problem. Made my way west after the war." "Hell of a resume," she muttered. He grinned. "You could say the same." She looked at him for a long time, weighing her next words. "I can shoot. I can sew. I know how to keep food fresh through winter. I may not move fast, but I don't quit." His smile faded into something softer. "You offering a partnership?" "I'm offering not to be left behind again." He nodded. "Then you're welcome here. For as long as you want." She reached for the cup he held, their fingers brushing. "For now," she said, "I just want to feel like I'm not a mistake." "You ain't," he said. "You're the best damn surprise this land's ever given me." The fire crackled louder. Outside, a wolf howled. Not far. Silas stood, walking to the window. "We've got company," he muttered. "Wolves?" "No," he said, jaw tightening. "Men." He reached for his rifle. She pushed herself upright on the cot. "What kind of men?" "The kind I hoped I left behind." She didn't ask more. He moved to secure the door, his eyes narrowing. Maybelle wheeled over to the hearth, reached into the ashes, and pulled out a small iron skillet. Her hands no longer trembled. Her heart did, but it beat stronger now. "We gonna fight?" she asked. "If we have to." She nodded. "Then you better show me where you keep the bullets." Silas looked over his shoulder, eyebrows raised. "You sure?" She gave him a crooked smile. "You saved my life. Let me return the favor." He handed her the rifle. "I knew you'd fire," he said. She cocked it with practiced hands, settling behind the window with a line of sight on the snowy path. "Then let's burn down anything that tries to take it from us." The first bullet shattered the window just as dawn lit the sky in bruised streaks of purple and gold. Glass sprayed inward, catching in Maybelle's hair and dress. She didn't flinch. Her hands were steady on the rifle, her eyes sharper than the cold air slicing through the broken pane. Silas dropped to a crouch beside her. 3 of them, maybe 4, coming from the ridge. "Friend of yours?" she asked dryly. "Not the kind I write home about." He peeked out and swore under his breath. "The one in the red duster. That's Cutter. Used to run with me back when I was dumb enough to think outlawing was living. And now they've come to collect? Something like that. Cutter don't forgive, don't forget. I left with a satchel of gold and a bullet in his shoulder. Charming. Less so up close. He'll burn this place if he thinks it'll bring me out." Maybelle's lips tightened. Her fingers brushed the trigger, then steadied. "Then let's not give him the pleasure." She rolled herself to the far end of the cabin where the wall hadn't yet been breached and set up a second position. They had limited ammunition, an old Winchester, and a single crate of supplies. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The next shot came through the door, splintering wood near Silas's shoulder. He didn't flinch. He moved like a man who'd been shot before, fast, low, and sure. Maybelle tracked one of the shadows moving behind the trees and fired. Missed. Silas looked back, eyes wide. "You ever actually used that thing before?" "Not on people. Try not to aim for the sky." She exhaled, slow and long, lining up the next shot. This time, when the outlaw stepped from behind the pine, she fired. He dropped. Silas grinned. "That's more like it." She didn't smile. Her stomach churned, but she kept her eyes locked on the tree lean. No time for hesitation. No time for fear. The siege stretched on, the minutes drawn tight with tension. Cutter's men circled, testing the defenses, firing blindly. The roof took 2 hits. Smoke drifted in from a fire they'd set near the barn. They were trying to smoke them out. Silas knelt by the fireplace, stuffing blankets along the cracks in the floor. "They'll storm the front soon." "Let them," Maybelle said. "I've got a surprise waiting." She'd laid broken glass along the entry, rigged a pan of boiling grease just above the doorway with a balancing stick. Crude, yes, but effective. Silas paused to look at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "What? You always been this dangerous?" She shrugged. "Folks never gave me the chance to be." A shot tore through the sidewall, embedding in the cupboard beside her. She ducked. The fire hissed, throwing angry sparks. "They'll expect you to run," he said. "Good," she replied. "Let them keep expecting." Then came the voice. Loud, drawling. "Cutter, see Eliz Boone. You gonna let that cripple fight your battles now? Heard you took a bride with a busted spine. That true? You hiding behind her skirt?" Maybelle's eyes narrowed. Silas moved to respond, but she put a hand on his arm. "No," she said. "Let me." She pushed the door open a crack and called out. "You think a woman in a chair's the easiest to break? That's because you've only ever fought men." Silence followed. Then laughter, cruel, loud, sharp. "I like her," Cutter called back. "Tell you what, Boone, send her out now, and I might just let you crawl away instead." She pulled the door shut, locked it, and rolled back. "I've heard better offers." Silas studied her for a long beat. "You're not scared." "I'm shaking inside," she admitted. "But fear's not going to move my legs, and it sure as hell won't stop a bullet. I've spent too long letting shame tell me who I am." The air grew hotter. Smoke began to sneak through the cracks. The fire outside was growing. They didn't have long. Silas picked up the last stick of dynamite from a box by the hearth. "We blow the shed. Draw them back. You can run faster than me. I'm not leaving you. Not asking you to." She rolled beside him, took his hand. "But if we don't do something now, they'll have our bones to pick by sundown." He hesitated, fingers curling over hers. Then he nodded. They worked quickly. Silas slipped out the back, hugging the shadows. Maybelle stayed by the front, rifle ready. The seconds dragged. Then, boom. The shed exploded in a geyser of fire and timber. Screams rang out. Confusion followed. Two of the men bolted, one catching a blast of flying wood to the neck. Maybelle waited, pulse hammering. The door burst open. Cutter. He stepped in like he owned the place, revolver raised, blood on his coat. She fired. The bullet hit his shoulder, opposite side this time. He roared, lunging forward. She tried to reload, but her fingers slipped. He was on her in a second, dragging her from the chair. You little witch. Then Silas tackled him from behind. They crashed into the table, sending plates and bullets scattering. Cutter threw a punch. Silas caught it, headbutted him hard enough to knock a tooth loose. Touch her again, and I'll tear your damn spine out, Silas growled. They struggled, but Maybelle was already moving, crawling toward the rifle. Her legs dragged like anchors. Her arms burned. Cutter reached for his gun. She grabbed the rifle, twisted, and fired from the ground. He collapsed beside the fire, bleeding out on the floorboards. Silas panted, crouched over her. You okay? She nodded, barely breathing. You, never better. She pushed herself upright, wincing. I've killed 2 men today. You saved both our lives. He helped her back into the chair. Outside, the wind had stilled. The other outlaws had fled. Silas leaned back against the wall, sweat and soot streaking his face. They won't be back. No, she said. But if they are, we'll be ready. He looked at her, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. I knew you were fire, he said softly. She touched her chest, where her heart still beat like a war drum. I didn't know how much I needed to burn. The cabin crackled around them, broken and smoky, but still standing. The snow outside had melted in patches, revealing hard ground. They were alive, bruised, bloodied, but alive. And for the first time in her life, Maybelle Carter didn't feel like something to be pitted. She felt forged. Silas reached for her hand again. We keep moving, he said. We start again. Just us. Her smile was slow, but it came. Then let's see how far this fire can spread. The snow had melted to slush in the days after the fire and the blood. The earth steamed at dawn. Breath rising from the ground like the land itself was sighing in relief. The cabin, battered and blackened but still standing, smelled of charred wood, iron, and pine smoke. Silence settled around it like a wool blanket, heavy, protective, earned. Maybelle sat by the open window, the light catching in the curls she hadn't bothered to tame. Her dress was patched at the hem, sleeves rolled up. In her lap rested a journal she hadn't written in for years. She didn't remember the last time words had come easily. But now they flowed like spring thaw, stubborn and sure. Each letter pressed into the page like a step taken after a long crawl. Silas was outside, splitting logs shirtless under the morning sun. The muscles in his back moved with the rhythm of a man who'd learned patience the hard way. His shoulder, still healing from the scuffle, was bound in linen. He never complained. She watched him for a long moment before returning to the page. They'd buried Cutter on the ridge where the wind never stopped blowing. Maybelle hadn't spoken a word over the grave. Silas had said one sentence. May the cold keep him quiet. After that, they never mentioned the fight again. But something had changed, not just in the quiet between them, which now throbbed with the unspoken, but in her. She moved through the cabin with purpose. She'd built shelves from scrap wood, learned to pickle vegetables, even taught herself how to melt snow into clean drinking water when the stream froze solid one morning. Her arms were stronger. Her voice no longer wavered. And though her legs still refused her, she no longer saw that as a deficit. She was beginning to believe she wasn't broken, just different. And Silas, he saw her the same way. He came in, shirt slung over his shoulder, sweat tracing a path down his chest. His eyes went to her first always. Never to the chair, never to the scar on her temple or the misshapen twist in her ankle. Just her. Got enough firewood to outlast a second war, he said, wiping his hands. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. She smiled, but there was tension there like a wire drawn tight. He noticed. You're thinking about leaving, he said, not accusing, just stating fact. She nodded. I thought about heading east. Maybe setting up a dress shop. I know how to sew. Could build a life. Sounds smart. It's what I thought I wanted. He waited, said nothing. She hated that about him sometimes. The way he let silences stretch, how he didn't fill them with noise or false comfort. He let her feel what she needed to feel. But then I look around, she said softly, and I think, what if this is the life? What if I stop trying to be someone else's idea of enough? Silas knelt in front of her. His hands cupped hers gently, like he might scare her off if he moved too fast. I never saw anything missing in you, Maybelle. Never once. You're whole. Stronger than most men I've known. But you don't need me to say it. She swallowed the lump rising in her throat. No, but I like hearing it. His thumb traced a line along her palm. Then I'll say it as often as you need. She set the journal down, eyes meeting his. When I came out here, I thought I was chasing love. What I found was something messy, harder, realer. What we've got, he said, it's not built on paper promises. No, it's built on fire and frostbite and bullets and burnt stew. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. She kissed him first. It wasn't soft. It wasn't perfect. But it was honest, and it made her heart beat like a war drum again. Later, they walked, or in her case rolled, along the trail that curled behind the cabin. The pines towered above, needles catching the sunlight in 1,000 tiny stars. He pushed her chair without asking, but always let her steer. There was a kind of dance between them now, one of respect and understanding. We could build something here, he said, kicking at a rock. I thought we already had. I mean something bigger, a place for people like us. She glanced up. Criminals and crippled brides. He smirked. Survivors. Fighters. Folks the world left for dead, but who kept going. Her brows lifted. A refuge. He nodded. People don't talk much about second chances in the West. They talk about killing or forgetting. I want a third option. Maybelle stared out over the land. It was harsh, untamed, unforgiving. But beneath the rough soil, something grew. Then let's build it, she said. But only if we call it Carter's Rest. He paused, surprised. I thought you'd want Boone's something or other. She smiled. You gave me your fire, Silas. Let me give a name. He took her hand again, held it tight. Carter's Rest, he said. I like that. The sky began to darken with an oncoming storm. Thunder whispered on the horizon, but neither of them moved. They stayed there, still and steady, as the wind picked up and dust scattered at their feet. In the distance, a rider crested the hill. Silas's eyes narrowed. He reached for the rifle on his back. But Maybelle didn't move. She just watched. The rider drew closer, then held up a white cloth, unmistakable. A signal. Peace. When the horse stopped 10 feet away, the rider, a young woman with a crooked scar on her chin, spoke first. You Boone. I am. I heard you and your woman burned down Cutter's crew. Word traveling. Folks are saying you got a place for those the law forgot. Silas looked to Maybelle. She nodded once. We do, but it ain't free. What's the price? Loyalty, work, and the understanding that out here, everyone carries scars. Some on the skin, some deeper. The woman dismounted. That I can do. And just like that, it began. In the weeks that followed, others came. Wanderers, widows, wounded soldiers, former outlaws, unwanted wives. They built slowly, carefully, every plank hammered into place by hands that once only knew loss. Maybelle taught the women how to mend saddles and shoot rifles. Silas ran drills and carved out a new code. No harm to the weak, no greed above need. The rules were simple, but they held. They built a fence around the land and planted wildflowers where blood had once spilled. The fields were rough, but they grew things. They laughed more. They sang at night by firelight. And Maybelle began to believe in something bigger than just surviving. She believed in home. One night, months after the snow first fell, she sat beneath the stars with Silas by her side. Her chair rested on a flat rock overlooking the valley. Below, lights twinkled from the cabins. Music rose faintly. Someone had built a fiddle for scrapwood. Do you ever miss the road? She asked. He shook his head. Not once. Even when we run out of coffee. He chuckled. Especially not then. She turned to him. I never thought a man would kneel beside me and see anything worth staying for. I didn't kneel because you needed saving, he said. I knelt because I finally found something sacred. Her heart swelled. Not with drama, not with fantasy, but with truth. They sat in silence, their hands intertwined. And when the wind rose again, it wasn't sharp or cold or cruel. It was warm, a promise whispered in the language only survivors understand. That would have been taken by fire had returned as life. The train screeched to a halt, its whistle howling into the frozen Wyoming wind. Snowflakes danced like ghosts around the iron beast as steam hissed from its sides. Mary Lou stepped onto the platform, her boots crunching against the ice-laced planks. She clutched her small bag close to her chest, fingers red and stiff from the cold, eyes scanning the unfamiliar town. Her heart beat with cautious hope. Her world was soundless, but not silent. The thump of her pulse, the whistle of wind brushing her face, the tremor of the ground as the train pulled away. She felt everything. It was a language all its own. She had learned to read lips, gestures, the shifting light in someone's eyes. Since the fever that stole her hearing at 12, she'd lived in a world built on observation. People stared as she walked toward the general store, the place where she was told her husband-to-be would be waiting. A tall man with a thick brown coat leaned against the hitching post, his boots polished, hat tilted just enough to shade a scowl. That had to be Edgar Thorne. He was taller than she imagined, older too, with a trimmed beard and eyes sharp as broken glass. Mary Lou paused, just a breath away, smoothing her dark wool dress and smiling. She held up her hand and waved once, a simple, elegant gesture that said hello. I'm here, I'm ready. Edgar's eyes narrowed. His lips moved fast, but she couldn't catch all the words. She tilted her head, pointed to her ear, then to her lips. Her practiced gesture. Most folks understood it quick enough. Some even tried to be kind. He stepped forward, voice raised, slow and deliberate. You're deaf? She nodded once, her smile faltering. She tried to hand him the letter he'd written her. The one promising warmth, companionship, a fresh start. The one she clung to on the long journey from Missouri. He glanced at it like it was filth. You didn't say that in your letter. She shook her head gently, pulled out her reply to show she had. She'd written it clearly. I lost my hearing at 12. I read lips. I can still be a good wife. I can still love. He took the letter, read one line, then crumpled it in his fist and threw it onto the street. You think a man like me's gonna marry a girl who can't hear a damn thing? What if I yelled during a fire? What if I talk and you just stare at me like a dumb cow? Laughter pealed from behind him. Two men leaned against the railing, spit trailing from their lips as they chuckled. One of them nudged the other and said something crude, and both howled like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week. Mary Lou's cheeks burned. She stood her ground, though her knees wanted to buckle. Her fingers clenched tighter around her bag. Edgar was still talking, still throwing words she didn't need to hear to understand. The curl of his lip, the flick of his hand, when he turned away, it said everything. Go find some deaf-mute preacher to marry you, he barked. You're not my problem. Then came the worst moment. He picked up her carpet bag, her only possession besides her letters and a single locket, and tossed it. It landed in a patch of slush and mud. Mary Lou didn't move. She stared at the bag, then at the man who had invited her here with honeyed words and broken every one of them with a single cruel act. No one helped her. The town buzzed with whispers. A few women in bonnets peeked from behind curtains. A shopkeeper watched from the steps, but no one came forward. No one met her eyes. She bent slowly, picked up her bag with shaking fingers, and brushed the snow away. Her shoulders were squared when she stood again. She didn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She turned and walked. She didn't know where she was going. Only away. Away from the laughter, the betrayal, the bitter taste of disappointment that clung to her tongue even though she hadn't spoken a word. Her boots sank into the snow as she left the edge of town and headed toward the hills where a patch of woods stood dark against the gray sky. She didn't look back. Every step felt heavier than the last, her bag growing heavier, the cold biting deeper. But she walked. The sky darkened. The wind rose. Her fingers stung with numbness, and her lips were cracked from breathing cold air. Still she kept moving. One step, then another. The road was empty. No wagons, no riders, just snow and silence. The wind shrieked through the trees. Branches creaked and snapped above her. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and stumbled forward. There was no inn, no barn, no fire waiting. Just cold and white and the unrelenting weight of rejection. Her knees buckled. She fell into the snow with a muffled grunt. The bag slipped from her hands, her breath catching in short bursts. She tried to rise, but her legs didn't answer. The cold had sunk into her bones. She lay there, face pressed to the frozen ground, and for the first time in years, she let herself cry. Tears slipped down her cheeks, vanishing into the snow. Not from weakness, but from heartbreak. She had come here willing to give everything she had. She had risked what little dignity remained in hopes of building a life, finding love, being seen. And now, she was no one. Alone in the wild with only a bag of letters and a body growing colder by the minute. Then the snow crunched nearby. A shadow moved through the trees. She didn't see the rider at first, but she felt the vibration of hooves. A horse. Closer. Then a voice, low, sharp. She couldn't make out the words, but she recognized concern. Urgency. Boots hit the snow. Strong hands touched her shoulders, gently lifting her. She flinched, breath caught in her throat. The stranger's face came into view. Broad-jawed, sun-worn, eyes like tarnished silver. His mouth moved slowly. He repeated the same word over and over. She couldn't hear it, but she saw his lips, cold. Cold. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms. Warmth. The scent of horses, leather, wood smoke clung to him. She blinked through the snow, clinging to her lashes as the world blurred. As he placed her in the saddle before him and pulled a thick coat around them both, she caught the faintest flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition. Not of who she was, but what she was. Someone in need. She rested her head against his chest. Her hands clutched the saddle horn, but her heart, bruised and frozen, felt something stir. A single thought bloomed in the quiet dark of her mind. Maybe not everyone turns away. The horse galloped into the storm. Behind them, the town and its cruelty faded into the snow. The snow fell harder as the horse thundered across the frozen clearing, hooves cutting deep into the white crust. Jack Colton leaned forward, his arms tight around the half-conscious woman in front of him. She was trembling beneath his coat, her head lolling against his shoulder. He could feel her weight shifting with every jolt, too light, too still. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough women abandoned to know the shape of the story. A carpet bag and a dress meant for impressing. A face too proud to beg and too worn to lie. The mail-order bride trade brought more heartbreak than hope to these hills. He pulled the horse to a halt at the edge of his homestead. A small, crooked cabin huddled beneath a canopy of pine trees, its chimney puffing smoke into the slate sky. A rough barn stood nearby, doors swinging in the wind. Jack slid down first, boots crunching as he landed. He caught her before she could slump from the saddle, then carried her toward the porch like he had once carried his wife. Only now, there was no joy in the moment. Inside, the warmth of the fire hit them like a wave. Jack set her gently down on the bearskin rug beside the hearth, pulling off his coat and wrapping it tighter around her. He grabbed a quilt from the rocker and tucked it around her legs, then reached for a kettle simmering over the flames. Steam rose as he poured a cup and offered it to her. She blinked slowly, dazed but aware. Her hands moved carefully, curling around the cup. She drank, and the color began to return to her face. Jack sat beside her, watching. He noticed the subtle way she turned her head toward the fire, how her eyes darted to his lips when he spoke. "You hurt?" She stared, eyes narrowing slightly. "I said, are you hurt?" He spoke slower, louder. Still, no reply. Then she raised her hand and pointed to her ear, then to her mouth, and shook her head. Understanding clicked into place. "Deaf. Well, hell," he muttered. "No wonder you didn't scream when I found you." She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached in her bag and pulled out a folded slip of paper. It was worn, creased in dozens of places. She offered it to him. He took it, unfolding it slowly. Her handwriting was small and neat. "My name is Mary Lou. I am deaf, but I read lips well. I can sign, write, and speak a little. I was meant to be married in town, But the man rejected me when he saw I couldn't hear. Jack read the words twice. He looked at her again, her face pale, eyes steady. Well, Mary Lou, he said, tapping the paper, that's a damn shame. But you're here now, and I reckon you'll be safe with me a while. She didn't smile, not yet, but her shoulders dropped slightly, the first sign of release. A child's footsteps thudded on the stairs. A small girl appeared, hair wild, a stuffed rabbit clutched in one arm. She paused when she saw Mary Lou, her wide eyes curious and unafraid. Who's that? The girl asked, voice high and sleepy. That's Mary Lou, Jack said. She can't hear, so you'll have to be real clear when you talk. The girl tiptoed closer, then waved a tiny hand in a slow arc. Mary Lou returned the wave, a soft smile finally blooming. I'm Sarah, the girl whispered, crawling close to her. Mary Lou pointed to her own chest, then slowly signed her name with graceful, practiced hands. Sarah gasped. What's that? She's spelling her name, Jack said. With her hands. It's called sign language. Can I learn? Mary Lou nodded once. Then she took Sarah's small hand and gently shaped her fingers into the sign 4S. A thud came from the loft above. A boy, maybe 8, slid down the ladder with the lazy confidence of someone who lived half in the trees. He paused at the bottom, eyeing Mary Lou with the protective suspicion only older brothers could muster. Jack stood. That's Thomas. He's quiet most of the time, like his old man. Mary Lou met the boy's stare evenly. He gave a small nod, then dropped onto a bench near the fire. Jack turned back to her. You're welcome to stay, long as you need. She pulled her notebook out again and scribbled something, then held it out. I don't want to be a burden. Jack frowned. You save yourself from freezing to death. That ain't a burden. That's survival. She watched him carefully, and something in her softened. Not quite trust, but a thread of it. That night, Mary Lou helped prepare supper. She moved with quiet efficiency, sleeves rolled up, chopping onions while the children watched her fingers dance through signs they couldn't yet understand. She wrote down ingredients, let Sarah stir the stew, and even coaxed a reluctant smile from Thomas with a piece of dried apple. Jack watched from the corner. He hadn't seen his children laugh like that in months. After the dishes were done, Mary Lou sat by the fire with her notebook. She drew something, small, steady lines, and passed the page to Jack. It was a picture of the cabin, the fireplace, the table, even the shape of his boots by the door. She'd captured it perfectly. You're an artist, he said, genuinely impressed. She shrugged modestly, then wrote, I watch. I remember. I see what people miss. He looked at her for a long time. She wasn't just a woman down on her luck. There was steel in her spine and intelligence in every glance. The man who turned her away had been a fool. Thunder rumbled outside. Jack stood to check the windows, making sure the shutters were secure. The wind howled across the hills, whistling between the boards. He poured 2 more cups of coffee, handed one to Mary Lou, and sat back down. You got any people waiting for you? She shook her head. No one. She signed something he didn't understand. Then, slowly, deliberately, she mimed picking up a letter, reading it, looking hopeful. Then her face fell. She pointed to the window, to the storm. Jack sat quiet for a while, sipping his drink. You don't have to prove anything to anyone here, he said finally. Just be who you are. She glanced at him, eyes shining in the firelight. Then Sarah climbed into Mary Lou's lap, the rabbit still tucked under one arm. She didn't speak, just rested her head on Mary Lou's chest and closed her eyes. Mary Lou froze, unsure, then wrapped her arms gently around the girl. Her expression shifted, uncertainty turning to warmth. She closed her eyes too, just for a moment, and let her body relax. Jack watched the scene in silence. A stranger had walked into their lives, broken and discarded. And now, already, she was part of the firelight, the quiet, the safety of the room. Outside, the storm raged. But inside, something small and fragile began to grow. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for tonight, he let himself believe in second chances. A brittle crack echoed outside the cabin, sharp and sudden. Jack froze at the table, spoon midway to his mouth. Mary Lou looked up from the stew she was ladling into bowls, her eyes catching the flicker of tension in his shoulders. She didn't hear the sound, but she saw the stillness it carved into him. "Stay here," he mouthed. She nodded, clutching Sarah closer on the bench beside her. The girl didn't ask questions. She only squeezed her stuffed rabbit tighter and stared at the door. Jack crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing the rifle from the wall. He paused at the window, carefully drawing back the curtain. Snow fell in lazy flakes now, soft and deceptive, blanketing the landscape in innocence. But out near the edge of the tree line, he saw it. Movement. 3 figures on horseback, shadows against the fading light. One of them leaned too far in the saddle, whiskey-drunken sway unmistakable. They weren't hunters. They weren't neighbors. They were looking for something or someone. Jack opened the door and stepped out, boots crunching against the ice-packed ground. The wind bit at his face as the riders approached. One he recognized instantly. Edgar Thorne, the man with too much pride and not enough heart. The same bastard who'd left Mary Lou in the snow. "Evening, Colton," Edgar called, reining in just outside the fence. "Heard you took an astray." Jack kept the rifle resting across his arms, not aiming it but not lowering it either. "What's it to you?" Edgar's lip curled. "She was meant to be mine. Signed a contract and everything. Then she tried to humiliate me in front of half the damn town. Told everyone I turned her out." Jack didn't move. "Far as I saw, you humiliated yourself." One of the riders shifted uneasily. The other just smirked, gloved fingers tapping the butt of a pistol at his hip. Edgar spat into the snow. "I came to collect what's mine. She's not your problem, Jack. Don't make her one." Jack's grip tightened on the rifle. "She's under my roof. She's my business now." A long pause hung in the air like frost, sharp and waiting. Edgar leaned forward. "You planning to marry her, then? Take a deaf woman to your bed? What kind of life is that?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't have to. Edgar scoffed. "You always were a fool for lost causes. Guess you'll learn the hard way." He turned his horse with a sharp yank of the reins. The others followed. Snow churned under hooves as they rode back into the dusk, vanishing into the woods like smoke on the wind. Jack stayed outside for a long while, watching, listening. When he finally returned to the cabin, his face was stone. Mary Lou met his eyes as soon as he stepped in. Her notebook was already in her hands. She passed it to him. "It's Edgar. I saw his shape. He wants to punish me for embarrassing him. I shouldn't have stayed." He read it, then looked up. "This ain't on you. That man's poison. Always has been." She scribbled again, faster this time. "You have children. A home. I won't let him ruin that. I can leave in the morning." Jack shook his head. "You think I'd let you walk out there alone? After all this? That man leaves bruises in his wake. I'm not about to send you back into his storm." She stared at him, throat tight. Her hand hovered above the paper, but she didn't write. Instead, she walked to the fireplace, knelt beside it, and stirred the coals, watching sparks lift into the air. Jack moved beside her, slowly. The children were asleep upstairs, their soft breathing the only sound beyond the fire's crackle. He sat down across from her, the rifle resting against the wall. "My wife used to do that," he said quietly. "Sit right there, with her hands near the fire. She'd warm up her fingers before she started sewing. Said it made the needle less cruel." Mary Lou watched his mouth, taking in every syllable. "I lost her to fever 2 winters ago. Fast. Too fast. Took me months to realize she wasn't coming back, even after she was buried." He swallowed, gazed distant. She was the kind of woman who filled a room just by being in it. Not loud, not demanding. Just full. I didn't know how quiet the world could be until she was gone. He looked at Mary Lou again. "I thought the silence would kill me. But you live in silence and still manage to bring warmth into this place." She lowered her gaze, heart pounding. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. His voice dropped even softer. "I don't care that you can't hear, Mary Lou. You listen better than anyone I've met. You see things, feel things. You understand what most men never even notice." She looked up, eyes full and shining, lips parted. Then she took her notebook and, with steady hands, wrote only 3 words. "You see me." He nodded. "I do." A silence fell between them again, but it was no longer empty. It was full of things unsaid, waiting. Then footsteps padded, softly from above. Sarah appeared, rubbing her eyes. "I had a bad dream," she whispered. Mary Lou reached out, arms open. The little girl crossed the room without hesitation and curled into her lap. Mary Lou brushed the hair from her face and rocked her gently, humming, soft, breathy. She couldn't hear her own voice, but the rhythm was tender, steady. It worked. Sarah's eyes closed once more. Jack watched, throat tight. He hadn't imagined this, any of it. And yet here it was, a deaf woman holding his daughter, protecting her as if she'd always belonged. A woman he barely knew, yet already trusted with everything. Mary Lou looked up, and he saw the question in her eyes. What now? What happens when the morning comes? He didn't answer aloud. Instead, he took her hand again. Outside, wind rattled the window shutters. Trouble was still out there, circling like wolves in the trees. But inside, they were building something stronger than fear. Snow glinted like broken glass in the early morning light. Jack stood at the chopping block, axe in hand, working through a frozen log with sharp, rhythmic strikes. Each swing sent a tremor through the brittle air, but his mind wasn't on firewood. It was on the man who might be riding toward them with a grudge sharpened into steel. Inside the cabin, Mary Lou stirred the pot on the stove, her movements calm, deliberate, though her shoulders were tight. She hadn't slept much. Neither had Jack. They hadn't spoken of Edgar since the visit, but his presence loomed in every glance toward the window, in every locked door and loaded rifle. Thomas sat near the hearth, polishing the scuffed leather of Jack's spare holster. Sarah helped Mary Lou knead dough with small, flour-dusted hands. It looked like peace, but they were all just waiting. When the first shot cracked through the air, it wasn't a surprise. It was a confirmation. Jack dropped the axe and reached for the rifle he'd propped against the chopping stump. From the tree line, a second shot rang out, splintering bark inches from his shoulder. "Get inside," he shouted, whether anyone could hear or not. Mary Lou had already grabbed Sarah, pulling her down behind the heavy table. Thomas crouched low beside the woodbox, eyes wide but steady. Jack burst through the door, rifle raised, scanning through the front window. 3 riders again. Edgar led them, this time with a pistol in hand and no pretense of diplomacy. Jack crouched below the sill and began checking his rounds. Mary Lou crawled over and tapped his arm. She pointed to herself, then to the back door. He shook his head, mouth firm. "No." She grabbed a pencil and scribbled on the side of the woodbox with shaking hands. "You can't shoot 3 men alone." He scrawled back beneath her words. "I'm not letting them near the kids." She stared at him, then reached for the rifle's second strap, the spare one he'd built to train Thomas. He blinked. "You ever shoot?" She shook her head, then paused. "Not at once. Not often. But enough." He hesitated for one breath, then strapped the backup rifle around her. It looked heavy in her arms, too large for her frame, but her stance was firm. A window shattered. Glass rained down across the floor. Jack spun and fired once, grazing the hat off one of the riders as they circled the barn. "Keep the kids hidden," he barked, and charged out the front. Gunfire split the air like thunder. Jack ducked behind a wagon, firing again, driving the attackers back into cover. But they were flanking, spreading out, trying to hem him in. Then the back door creaked open. Mary Lou slipped out the side, silent as a shadow. She moved low, boots barely crunching over the snow, every step deliberate. She circled wide, keeping to the trees, just like she'd seen hunters do in Missouri. She couldn't hear the gunfire, but she saw the smoke, felt the vibration in the ground, saw the way Edgar's horse shifted when he leaned too far forward. She crouched behind a stump, breath fogging in short bursts. Edgar dismounted, pistol raised, creeping toward the house. Mary Lou lifted the rifle, braced it against her shoulder, and squeezed the trigger. The kick nearly knocked her down, but the shot rang true. Edgar cried out and spun, his leg giving beneath him. He fell into the snow, yelling curses she couldn't hear. Jack, hearing the gunshot and seeing Edgar drop, looked up in shock. Then he saw her. Mary Lou stood slowly, rifle still in hand, face pale but resolved. The other 2 men turned at the sight of their leader wounded. Jack didn't give them the chance to think. He fired again, striking one square in the arm. The second man fled, disappearing into the woods without a word. It was over in seconds. Jack rushed to Mary Lou as she lowered the rifle, her arms trembling now that the adrenaline was draining. She looked up at him, blinking through snowflakes and smoke. He didn't speak. He just pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face against her shoulder, holding her like she was life itself. Behind them, Edgar writhed in the snow, clutching his bleeding leg, still shouting. But the sheriff would find him soon enough. Jack had already sent a letter the day before, detailing the threats. The law was slow in these parts, but not blind. They left Edgar where he fell and walked back to the cabin together. Inside, the children ran to them. Thomas wrapped his arms around Mary Lou's waist. Sarah buried her face in her skirts. Mary Lou dropped to her knees, pulling them close, trembling for the first time. Jack knelt beside her, resting a hand on her back. "You saved us," he said slowly, knowing she would watch his lips. She shook her head, tears spilling over. "You did," he repeated. "You didn't run. You stood your ground. For me. For them." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Later, when the sheriff came and took Edgar away, moaning and cursing every step, Jack stood beside her on the porch, snow still falling around them in soft spirals. "You know," he said with a small smile, "I reckon I've been more scared today than I ever was in the war." Mary Lou smiled faintly, then tapped her heart. She signed a word he hadn't learned yet. He tilted his head. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the little notepad, writing carefully. "Brave, but not without fear. Brave is doing it anyway." He took the note, read it twice, then kissed her fingers. They said little as the sun dipped low, casting gold over the cabin roof and the trampled snow. That night, as the fire crackled low and the children slept nestled against each other, Jack sat beside Mary Lou at the hearth. He took her hand again. "I don't want this to be temporary," he said. "Not shelter, not safety, not us." She turned to him, eyes searching, and he signed slowly, clumsily, the words he'd practiced alone in the barn for nights. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from a joy so full it ached. She nodded once, then leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sure. There were no vows spoken that night, no witnesses beyond the walls and wind. But in that quiet room, something loud and lasting was born, a love that didn't need words, a promise stronger than sound. In the heart of a world that once cast her out, Mary Lou had found her place. Not just in a cabin or beside a man, but within a family. A future, a voice all her own. And in the silence, she had been heard. The wind howled through the narrow canyon, carrying the scent of rain and wild sage. Maria tightened her grip on the reins, urging the weary mare forward. Mud splattered against her skirts, but she couldn't slow down, not now, not when every thud of her heart seemed to echo the pounding hooves behind her. Her husband's voice still haunted the night air, cursing her name, vowing to break her for running. She could almost hear Jeb sneer, the way his hand would clamp around her wrist, his nails digging into her skin. A shiver raced down her spine. She pressed her heels into the mare's sides, whispering soft words of encouragement, though her own voice trembled. The trail ahead was barely visible, washed out by the relentless rain. Trees bent under the wind's weight, branches scraping her arms like clawed hands. She knew the risks of fleeing in such a storm, drowning in a swollen river, the horse slipping on wet rock, or worse, being caught. The thought of Jeb's hands on her again was enough to banish any hesitation. She hadn't planned it this way. For months, Maria had quietly saved, hiding coins in the seam of her dress, hoarding provisions when Jeb wasn't looking. She had been meticulous, careful to never let her husband suspect her dreams of escape. But tonight, after his rage left her bruised and bleeding on the floor, she knew she couldn't wait any longer. The bruises would fade, but the suffocating fear never would. Lightning flashed, illuminating the rocky path ahead. For a heartbeat, Maria saw the vastness of the open plains stretching beyond the canyon. Freedom just out of reach. She could make it. She had to. Jeb would never let her live if he found her. Behind her, the distant howl of a hound sent a fresh surge of terror through her veins. Maria leaned closer to the mare's neck, her breath ragged, whispering desperate prayers. The horse's muscles quivered under the strain, but the animal pushed on, as if understanding the stakes. The memories of the life she left clawed at her. A dilapidated cabin where daylight rarely reached. The smell of whiskey and unwashed clothes. Jeb's hands rough and unforgiving, his words sharper than any blade. A mail-order bride, that's what she had been. A solution to Jeb's loneliness, a cheap purchase from an advertisement. Hope had flickered briefly when she first arrived, but it was soon snuffed out by his cruelty. Maria's only solace had been the endless sky, the whisper of the wind when she ventured beyond the cabin. Freedom had seemed like a cruel joke, something only found in stories. Until tonight, until she could no longer endure the bruises and the broken spirit. The horse stumbled, nearly toppling Maria from the saddle. She bit back a sob, forcing herself upright, patting the mare's neck with trembling hands. "Just a little more," she murmured. "Just a little farther." Her mind drifted to the stories her mother used to tell, back in the bustling city far from this wilderness. Tales of brave women who fought for their freedom. Maria had always thought herself too weak for that kind of bravery. But tonight, fear had molded her into something fierce. Survival was all that mattered. She reached the crest of the canyon, the terrain leveling out, and dared to glance back. No torches, no silhouettes, just rain and darkness swallowing her trail. Relief whispered through her, but she didn't dare stop. Jeb wasn't the kind of man to give up easily. He would follow her until his rage was sated. A flicker of movement to the right startled her. Maria pulled the horse to a halt, heart pounding in her throat. The shadows seemed alive, every rustle of leaves like a predator stalking her. She gripped the reins tighter, forcing herself to breathe slowly. Panic would only get her killed. She urged the horse into a shallow creek, hoping the running water would mask her scent. As they waded through, Maria glanced at the bruises on her wrists, the dark blotches already swelling. Proof of her desperation. Proof that she could no longer endure life as his wife. Night deepened, the sky a sprawling canvas of black, pierced occasionally by flashes of lightning. Maria spotted a cluster of rocks ahead, their shadows deep and inviting. She guided the mare behind them, dismounting carefully. Her legs wobbled, unused to the strain, but she pushed the pain aside. Sliding to the ground, she leaned against the cool stone, trying to catch her breath. The mare snorted softly, ears flicking at every noise. Maria stroked the horse's muzzle, whispering gratitude. The animal had carried her through the storm, and now they both needed rest. A sob broke free from her lips, the weight of what she had done settling like lead in her stomach. She hadn't planned on being this terrified. The thrill of escape had been swallowed by the crushing reality of survival. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rapid flutter of her heart. Something rustled nearby. Maria froze, every muscle tensing. Slowly, she peered around the rock. In the faint light, a lone coyote slunk through the brush, its nose to the ground. Relief washed over her, mixed with a strange kinship. The animal was just as wary as she was, searching for safety in the wilderness. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of quiet. Tomorrow, she would need to find water, maybe food if luck was on her side. She had no plan beyond getting away, and that realization settled like a stone in her gut. What kind of life awaited her if she survived the night? Would Jeb ever stop looking? The mare nuzzled her shoulder, and Maria managed a faint smile. They were alone, for now. That was something. The rain eased, leaving behind the crisp scent of wet earth and sage. She drew her knees to her chest, whispering another prayer, not just for survival, but for strength. Sleep pulled at her, but she resisted. The fear was too sharp, too consuming. She couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Her hands gripped the small knife tucked in her boot, a last defense if Jeb found her. As dawn's first light edged the horizon, Maria squinted against the growing brightness. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but she couldn't rest yet. She needed to move, put more distance between herself and the life she had left behind. The journey ahead was uncertain, and danger lurked at every turn. But as the sun rose, coloring the sky in shades of gold and pink, Maria allowed herself a fragile hope. Maybe freedom wasn't just a story after all. She mounted the mare again, exhaustion mingling with determination. As they moved deeper into the wild, Maria couldn't help but glance over her shoulder one last time, whispering to the wind, "I will not go back. Not ever." The trail stretched before her, wild and unforgiving, but it was hers to follow. And no matter what waited beyond the next hill, Maria knew she would keep riding until her heart stopped, or until she finally found peace. The sun climbed higher, scorching the open plains where shade was a rare mercy. Maria's throat ached, parched and raw, her skin flushed with heat despite the cool morning air. The mare's pace had slowed to a weary shuffle, its ribs heaving with each labored breath. Her muscles ached from gripping the saddle for hours on end, but stopping meant dying. Stopping meant being dragged back to Jeb's hell. She pushed forward, eyes bleary and stinging. Her fingers trembled from hunger and fatigue. She had managed to scavenge a handful of berries, bitter and barely enough to fool her stomach. The wind cut through her thin dress, chilling her sweat-soaked skin, but she welcomed the discomfort. It kept her awake. By midday, her vision blurred, the landscape wavering like a mirage. Thoughts twisted into tangled knots, fear and exhaustion knitting together until she could scarcely separate them. It happened so quickly she barely registered the fall. One moment, she was upright. The next, her body struck the ground with a dull, sickening thud. Pain exploded in her side, her cheek pressed against the dirt. The mare stood nearby, staring at her with dark, unreadable eyes before wandering off to graze. Maria tried to rise, but her limbs felt as heavy as iron. Her head lolled to the side, the world dimming at the edges. A strange calmness crept over her, like slipping beneath cool water. Maybe death was preferable to what waited behind her. At least here, in the open air, she could breathe freely. Darkness swirled around her, seeping into her bones. She felt herself drifting, thoughts scattering like ash on the wind. But just as the quiet pulled her under, she felt something firm and unyielding grip her shoulder. The sensation jolted her awake. Voices filtered through the haze, foreign, clipped, unfamiliar. She blinked, her vision sharpening just enough to make out shadowed figures looming over her. Panic clawed at her chest, but her body refused to move. They were men, strangers, and she was helpless. One of them spoke with a gentleness that surprised her, his tone low and measured. Maria's gaze latched onto his face, the sharp lines of his jaw, the intensity of his dark eyes. His skin was bronzed by the sun, his hair long and bound with leather. She tried to speak, but her voice emerged as a cracked whisper. His gaze remained steady, assessing her condition with calm efficiency. Others surrounded them, watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. The man, clearly a leader of some kind, issued a command, and the others moved with swift precision. Maria's mind swam as she was lifted, her body cradled by strong arms. She wanted to protest, to fight, but her strength had long since evaporated. They carried her to their camp, nestled within the shade of cottonwood trees beside a narrow, winding creek. The air was cool here, the scent of water and earth mingling with wood smoke. Maria drifted in and out of consciousness, catching glimpses of their world. Women grinding corn, children darting between tents, laughter punctuating the rustle of leaves. Yet, there was always a watchful tension beneath it all, eyes following her whenever she stirred. When she finally woke with some clarity, she lay within a tent fashioned from hide and wood. Her body ached, but she was clean and wrapped in a blanket softer than anything Jeb had ever allowed her to own. The smell of herbs clung to her skin, and her side throbbed where someone had applied a poultice. The leader entered with quiet authority, his gaze finding hers immediately. He carried a bowl of something steaming, the aroma rich and savory. Maria's stomach twisted with hunger. He held out the bowl, nodding for her to take it. Her hands shook as she accepted the offering, her gaze darting to his face. "Eat," he said, his voice calm but commanding. She hesitated, the instinct to distrust ingrained deep. But the hunger overruled caution. She brought the bowl to her lips, drinking greedily. The warmth spread through her, chasing away the chill that had settled in her bones. He watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She wanted to ask him who he was, why he was helping her, but her words tangled in her throat. "My name is Lone Wolf," he said, breaking the silence as if sensing her questions. His words were slow, deliberate, his accent thick but clear. "You are safe here. For now." Maria nodded, unsure of what to say. It was the first kindness she'd been shown in months. "Why help me?" she managed to ask, her voice brittle. Lone Wolf's gaze did not waver. "You were dying? Leaving you would have been no better than killing you myself." There was a frankness to his words that made her chest tighten. Compassion, she realized, not pity. He hadn't helped her because she was weak or broken, but because she had needed help. Nothing more. "Thank you," she whispered, her fingers clutching the empty bowl as if it were the only solid thing left in her world. A faint smile ghosted across Lone Wolf's face, so brief she almost missed it. "You're not healed. Rest." He rose to leave, but Maria's voice caught him before he could step outside. "Are you the leader?" she asked. He paused, considering her. Yes. It was the simplest answer, but it carried weight. Leadership meant authority, respect, and perhaps protection. She nodded slowly, the pieces of her situation beginning to fit together. As the days passed, Maria's strength returned. The Comanche were cautious around her, but not hostile. Lone Wolf continued to visit, sometimes speaking, sometimes merely watching her with that same steady gaze. One evening, she sat outside the tent, her fingers trailing through the cool grass. Lone Wolf approached, his presence as quiet as the evening breeze. "You are stronger now," he observed. "Thanks to you," she replied, her voice steadier than it had been since her escape. "Why did you run?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. The question burrowed into her chest like a thorn. Memories of Jeb's rage flickered through her mind, but so did her own resilience, the courage that had pushed her into the night. "I had to," she said, her voice low. "If I stayed, I would have died." Lone Wolf nodded, as if he had expected the answer. His gaze remained fixed on her, unyielding but not unkind. "You are welcome to stay until you are well," he said. "But after that, you must choose your own path." His words struck her like a blow, the offer of freedom both thrilling and terrifying. "Why would you help me?" she asked again, her voice trembling. "Because you were alone," he replied, "and no one should have to fight alone." The weight of his words settled over her, rich and heavy. For the first time in her life, Maria felt something other than fear. She felt hope. Lone Wolf turned and walked away, leaving her to ponder the truth she could not yet admit to herself. She wasn't only healing from her wounds, she was beginning to understand what it meant to be truly free. Smoke spiraled into the morning sky, thin and wavering before dissolving into the crisp air. Maria stood at the edge of the camp, her fingers twisting the fabric of her borrowed dress. It was rougher than anything she had worn before, but clean, smelling of herbs and fire. Her strength had returned, though sleep often eluded her. Nightmares still crawled into her dreams, dragging her back to the darkness she had fled. Lone Wolf had kept his word, offering her sanctuary without expectation. She had watched him command the camp with quiet authority, his presence a constant, calming force. His people respected him, their deference unspoken but palpable. Children clung to his legs, women sought his counsel, and warriors deferred to his judgment. Their conversations had grown longer, more personal. He spoke of his people's struggles, their need to adapt as the white men encroached on their lands. She shared her own story in fragments, words coded in shame and grief. He never pressed her, simply listened, his gaze steady and kind. "You carry pain like a stone," he had said once, his voice low and certain. But stones could be put down. She wanted to believe him. Her hands busied themselves with work, grinding roots, weaving baskets, anything to occupy her restless mind. The Comanche women watched her with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, but she sensed their judgment easing. Her willingness to help had earned her something akin to acceptance. Lone Wolf often found her at the creek's edge, washing clothes or simply staring into the rippling water. Their conversations had grown warmer, laced with laughter that surprised her each time. His humor was dry and subtle, his rare smiles like treasures unearthed from the dust. She had started to feel safe. But safety, she soon learned, was only an illusion. It began with the dogs. The animals bristled, their hackles raised, ears twitching as if scenting something foul. Maria noticed their unease, her own skin prickling with foreboding. Lone Wolf sensed it too. His men grew watchful, weapons kept close at hand even as the camp's routines continued. It wasn't until the sun dipped below the horizon, staining the sky with crimson and gold, that the first gunshot rang out. The report cracked through the air like a thunderclap. Screams followed, sharp and panicked. Maria's heart seized, her body freezing before instinct propelled her into motion. She stumbled from her tent, the world tilting and swaying. Men were shouting, women ushering children to safety. Her gaze found Lone Wolf, his expression grim as he issued orders, his voice steady and unyielding despite the chaos. Jeb's voice cut through the din, unmistakable even from a distance. "Maria, you whore, you think you can hide from me?" The words drove nails into her chest, each syllable brimming with fury. He sounded close, too close. Her legs trembled, threatening to buckle beneath her weight. She could see them now, Jeb and his men, a haphazard collection of ranch hands and drifters armed with rifles and cruelty. Jeb's eyes gleamed with madness, his face contorted in a rage she had only seen hints of before. He had tracked her, chased her across miles of wilderness like a hunter stalking prey. And now he had found her. The Comanche warriors moved swiftly, shields and bows in hand, their movements fluid and practiced. Arrows sliced through the air, striking with precision. But Jeb's men were relentless, their gunfire echoing like thunder. Lone Wolf appeared beside her, his hand clasping her arm. "Stay low. Keep moving," he ordered. I can't," Maria stammered, her voice strangled by terror. "You must." His eyes locked onto hers, fierce and resolute. "Do not give him the satisfaction of breaking you." The words snapped something inside her. For months, she had cowered, endured, and run. But now, with death all around her, the fear began to shift. Rage seeped into its place, burning away the helplessness like dry grass caught in a wildfire. Lone Wolf released her arm, his attention shifting back to the fight. Maria crouched behind a fallen log, her chest heaving with rapid breaths. She watched him, his movements calculated and efficient, arrows loosed with the precision of a hawk's strike. Jeb's men pressed forward, their numbers greater than the warriors defending the camp. Maria's mind raced, her hands trembling as she fumbled for something. Anything that could help. Her fingers closed around a heavy branch, its surface splintered and rough. When one of Jeb's men broke through the line, his eyes wild and desperate, Maria swung with all her strength. The impact jarred her arms, the man collapsing with a strangled cry. She stared down at him, chest heaving, adrenaline roaring through her veins. Another came, and she swung again, the effort drawing a startled sob from her own lips. She kept swinging, kept fighting, even as tears streamed down her face. Through the haze of violence, she glimpsed Jeb, his rifle aimed squarely at Lone Wolf's chest. Horror clawed at her throat, the world narrowing to that single moment. "Lone Wolf!" she screamed, her voice shredded by panic. He moved just as the shot rang out, but not quickly enough. The bullet tore through his shoulder, his body jerking from the impact. Maria cried out, rushing to his side as he fell to one knee, his face contorted with pain. Jeb's laughter sliced through the air. "So, this is where you've been hiding." crawling around with savages like the filthy little rat you are. Lone Wolf struggled to rise, blood staining his shirt. Maria knelt beside him, her hands pressing against the wound, her own fear dwarfed by the sight of his pain. "Don't speak to her," Lone Wolf growled, his voice rough but unbroken. Jeb's smirk widened. "You think you can protect her? She's mine." The words ignited something dark and furious within her. Maria rose, her legs steady for the first time since Jeb's arrival. "No," she said, her voice stronger than she had ever heard it. "I was never yours." Jeb's eyes narrowed, the challenge sparking fresh anger. He took a step forward, but a Comanche warrior's arrow whistled past his face, grazing his cheek. He recoiled, fury momentarily eclipsed by shock. "You come here again, and you will not leave alive," Lone Wolf warned, his words like stone. Jeb hesitated, his men already retreating, disheartened by the unexpected resistance. He glared at Maria, his gaze promising retribution. "This isn't over," he spat before turning his back and trudging into the darkness. As the echoes of battle faded, Maria sank to her knees beside Lone Wolf. Blood soaked her hands, but she didn't flinch. "You're hurt," she whispered, her voice thick with grief and guilt. "It is not as bad as it feels," Lone Wolf replied, his smile faint but real. "You fought well." Maria stared at him, the weight of his words settling over her. She had fought, and for the first time, she had not been afraid. But she knew Jeb would return, and next time, he would not leave so easily. Days passed in a haze of recovery and restless tension. Lone Wolf's wound proved deep but not fatal, though the pain left him pale and feverish at times. Maria remained by his side, her hands steady even when her heart quaked. The Comanche healer guided her, teaching her how to clean and dress the wound, how to press herbs into the torn flesh to draw out infection. The work kept her from falling into the dark corners of her own thoughts. Lone Wolf bore the pain with a stoic silence, though his eyes often lingered on her with a kind of wonder that unsettled her more than any threat. As his strength returned, so too did his leadership. Despite the bandages wrapped tight around his shoulder, he moved through the camp each morning, his voice firm as he reassured his people and prepared them for what lay ahead. Jeb's attack had shaken the camp's peace. Every man, woman, and child understood that the white man who had come for Maria would not leave them in peace. His cruelty had been clear in the bodies of the fallen, in the ashes left by fires he had set to their lodges. The warriors spoke of vengeance in low, heated tones, but Lone Wolf tempered their anger, insisting that action must be taken with wisdom, not rage. Maria felt their resentment toward her, even if it was rarely spoken aloud. Their kindness toward her was strained, their suspicion thickening the air. She couldn't blame them. She had brought danger to their doorstep, but she could not leave. Not now. One night, she sat beside the fire, her fingers worrying a scrap of leather she had been given to braid. She glanced up to find Lone Wolf watching her, his gaze sharp and searching. "You have not slept," he said, his voice calm but knowing. She shook her head. "I keep seeing his face, his rage, and the hate in his eyes." "Fear is a weapon he has used well," Lone Wolf replied. "But it is not the only weapon." "What other weapons do I have?" she asked, her voice hollow. "I am not like you. I cannot fight. You fought when he attacked the camp." Her hands stilled. "That was different. I was afraid, desperate." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. "Fear can be a weakness, but it can also be a strength. Desperation makes us act, but it is purpose that makes us endure." "What purpose do I have?" The words slipped out before she could stop them, bitterness tainting her tone. "I'm just a runaway bride, hunted like a dog across the plains." "You are more than that. You have proven it," he said. "You fought to live, to be free. You're still fighting, even now." She swallowed hard, his words cutting deeper than any wound. He spoke to her with a faith she did not feel. But maybe that was the point. Maybe she had to find that faith herself. That night, she dreamed of her mother's voice, the woman's warm embrace shielding her from the chill of a city that had never truly welcomed them. The woman who had raised her to be kind but strong, who had died before Maria ever learned what it meant to be either. She woke with tears staining her cheeks, but with a resolve hardening within her chest. Lone Wolf continued to heal, his strength returning day by day. Maria worked beside him, her hands roughened by labor, her body worn by sleepless nights. But with each day that passed, she grew stronger, not only in body, but in mind. Jeb would return. She knew it with a certainty that hollowed her out. But she would not be taken like some helpless animal. Not again. She trained with the Comanche warriors, their eyes skeptical, but their guidance patient. They taught her how to defend herself, how to move with the earth instead of against it. Her body ached from the efforts, but she pressed on, her determination more potent than pain. Lone Wolf watched her often, his approval unspoken but evident. Their conversations became longer, the silences between them comfortable rather than strained. She learned about his life, his family, the burden of leadership that weighed upon him like a stone. Their closeness frightened her, but it also steadied her. The night Jeb returned, the air was thick and heavy, the clouds smothering the stars. Maria sensed him before anyone else did, a sickening intuition gnawing at her bones. Lone Wolf had placed sentries around the camp, warriors skilled in blending with the shadows. But Jeb's hatred was a force of its own, propelling him forward despite the dangers. The first gunshot cracked the air, its violence ripping through the silence. Maria bolted upright, her fingers clenching the knife she had kept by her side. Her pulse roared in her ears, but her fear no longer paralyzed her. It sharpened her senses, focused her mind. Screams erupted from the outskirts of the camp. Flames licked at the sky, Jeb's men setting fire to everything they could reach. Panic rippled through the people, scattering them into the darkness. Lone Wolf shouted orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. Maria followed him, her steps quick and sure. Warriors clashed with Jeb's men, the air thick with smoke and fury. She found herself face to face with Jeb. His eyes gleamed with a madness that turned her stomach. His rifle hung from his hand, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "Thought you could hide from me forever," he sneered, his voice slick with triumph. "You're mine, Maria. Always have been." "No," she said, her voice steady and cold. "I was never yours." The words ignited him, his rage blooming like wildfire. He lunged toward her, his hand reaching for her throat. But Maria was ready. She drove the knife into his side, the blade sinking deep. He gasped, his eyes wide with shock. Blood blossomed between them, staining her hand. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Jeb collapsed, his body crumpling to the earth like so much refuse. Maria stared down at him, her breathing ragged, her fingers trembling. Lone Wolf appeared beside her, his gaze unreadable. She waited for judgment, for scorn. But all he did was reach out, his hand clasping hers, pulling her away from the body. The fires were extinguished, the intruders driven off. And for the first time, Maria truly felt the weight of her freedom. In the days that followed, the camp slowly rebuilt. Scars remained, but life continued. Maria found herself woven into the fabric of their community, her hands building rather than destroying. She stood beside Lone Wolf as the sun rose over the plains, its light painting the world in gold. His gaze met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. "Where will you go now?" he asked. "I don't want to go anywhere," she replied, her voice steady. "Not if you'll have me." He nodded, his expression softened by something that felt like hope. "Then stay," he said. "Fight with us. Live with us." For the first time, she felt no urge to run. No need to look over her shoulder. She was home,